Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are moving far beyond the typical historical narrative of, kings, battles, and political dynasties.
Mm,
We are quite literally picking up the shovel because we are digging deep into the ecological bedrock that defines ancient Indian civilization.
we really are. We're shifting the focus from the palace to the field and from, let's say, the chronology of rulers to the constraints of the climate.
Exactly.
Our mission is to analyze the actual physical limits and, well, the immense opportunities, the soil, the relentless rivers, the unpredictable rain that governed whether or not these massive, complex societies could even root themselves, let alone thrive.
Our mission today is all about understanding these deep ecological roots. It's an exploration of how the natural environment placed these fundamental restrictions on human endeavor, and equally importantly, how human effort, armed with new tools and ingenuity, eventually reshaped that environment to fit its needs.
Right.
We are viewing history through a really essential environmental lens.
And that lens is critically relevant right now. I mean, when we look at the growing pace of industrialization and, the explosive population growth across the world today, the pressure on natural environs, our plants, our animals, our water systems, the soil itself, and the metals we extract is just, well, it's acute.
It's everywhere.
It is. So the urgency surrounding the modern problem of ecology and environment makes viewing the ancient world through this perspective absolutely crucial. It allows us to compare their struggle for resource balance against our own.
Okay, so let's unpack this with a few definitions, just to establish our ground rules for you. Let's start with the word ecology. It sounds like a concept that has been around forever, a timeless truth about nature. But the formal term is surprisingly modern. It was actually coined relatively recently in 1869.
Exactly, which is quite piquing to some people. For much of its early life, it was sort of relegated to being a specialized branch of biology.
This is a subfield.
It's just a subfield, yeah. It was essentially the study of interactions among organisms. But today, of course, it's recognized as a massive, independent, interdisciplinary subject because its core focus is so fundamental. The complex, constantly changing relationship between various living organisms, plants, animals, and, of course, human beings.
And the nature of that relationship is exactly what defines ancient versus modern human advance. I mean, if you look at ancient human life, the core strategy was straightforward survival.
Right.
It was relying heavily on the wild. You were extracting wild produce, you were hunting game, and you were fundamentally just one, albeit the most intelligent species, operating within a vast, unpredictable natural system.
But that relationship is completely inverted once you transition to the industrial age and beyond. In ancient times, survival meant depending on nature's bounty. In the modern era, survival, especially for a specific species, often means preservation through human efforts. We engineer environments, we control water flows, and we manage forests.
We build the ecosystem.
We do. And that massive contrast highlights the immense scale of the environmental changes ancient societies had to engineer just to advance from hunter-gatherer to settled farmer. They weren't just adapting, they were actively and sometimes brutally conquering the landscape.
So let's move into our first major section then. We can focus on these core tensions between environment, determinism, and what you could call the march of human advance.
Good place to start.
We need to begin by properly defining environment because in this context, it's far more comprehensive than just, climate and geography.
Absolutely. When we talk about environment here, we're using the broadest possible definition, all surroundings, encompassing both the natural and the man-made.
So what are the natural elements?
Well, the natural elements are what you would expect. The soil structure, the air quality, the water sources, and all the plants and animals that inhabit those spaces. The basics.
But the man-made environment is just as critical, maybe more so in some ways, because these elements fundamentally alter the natural state and define the resources available to the people.
That's right. This includes their food systems, their shelter designs, and crucial transport facilities. And you really have to think about the infrastructure. The roads that cut through forests.
The bridges that span rivers.
The massive dams and reservoirs, and the specific structures built as dwellings. Every single one of these is a human intervention that creates a new environment on top of the old one.
And we must broaden that definition even further to understand its total impact on human effort. The sources are pretty clear on this. The environment isn't just physical. It includes the rural and urban settings, which impose different resource demands.
And the socio-economic, cultural, and political conditions of the time. You have to factor those in.
How so?
Well, think about it. The demand of a large, complex state a political environment, for grain storage or for infrastructure, like a new road,
Hmm,
dictates resource extraction rates very differently than a small tribal unit would.
I see.
So all these external factors impact what human effort is even possible at any given moment.
Now, we can acknowledge that the environment has an undeniable and direct bearing on human efforts. I mean, the location of water, for instance, determines where you can settle. It's a non-negotiable.
Right.
But here is the critical warning from the sources, and this is where it gets really interesting. We have to avoid falling into the trap of environmental determinism.
The simplistic idea.
Exactly. The idea that geography alone dictates a society's destiny.
That view is just.
Mm.
It's incomplete because the relationship is fundamentally reciprocal.
Mm.
While nature sets the boundaries, human efforts constantly push back and substantially affect the natural surroundings. We are not just passive reactors to nature. We are its most powerful agents of change.
And we have clear, compelling examples of this reciprocal effect right at the foundation of ancient Indian history. Take the fundamental act of clearing land deforestation, followed by the successful production of staple cereals like wheat or rice. This process led directly to the formation of large stationary settlements, that is, humanity actively engineering the ecological system for its own long-term benefit.
Trading one resource for another.
Trading forest resources for agricultural stability. Exactly.
But conversely, nature could assert its dominance and completely undo centuries of human effort. Natural forces, such as drastic long-term changes in climate or, unexpected alterations in the courses of major rivers.
Like we'll see with the Harappans.
Precisely. Those things cause the complete desertion of settled areas and, crucially, forced mass migration of entire populations. The ability of a river to change its path is a powerful reminder that human technology, however advanced for its time, was still incredibly fragile in the face of these macroecological shifts.
Okay, let's pull back to that macro scale regarding climate shifts and how they drove human movements. The source material notes that globally, there have been no major climatic changes since 9000 BC.
Right, which suggests a long period of general stability.
But when we look at specific regions like ancient India, those regional variations mattered immensely.
Indeed. We need to focus specifically on the Central Asian crisis during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. Scholars studying paleoclimate have documented a period where this region suffered from the twin pressures of extreme aridity, meaning massive droughts and bitterly freezing temperatures.
So it wasn't a localized cold snap.
Not at all. This was a sustained, hostile ecological regime. It lasted for a very long time.
That sounds like an utterly compelling environmental push factor. I mean, if the land can no longer sustain your traditional pastoral or semi-agricultural lifestyle because there's no water and it's extremely cold, what's the inevitable consequence?
The consequence is movement. The compelling environmental pressure, the loss of arable land and grazing pasture-forced mass population movements. People from South Central Asia were compelled to move south, seeking regions with a more hospitable climate and better access to water.
And they moved toward the Indian subcontinent.
Specifically towards the Indian subcontinent. Crucially, environmental historians attribute this specific migration, the movement of the speakers of the Indo-Aryan language, the people we associate with the Rig Veda, not to political ambition or military conquest initially,
But survival.
but to a vast life-or-death environmental flight. They were escaping an ecological collapse.
So the very foundation of the culture we're studying was laid not by a centralized decision, but by environmental necessity. And for any human advance to follow in this new land, the prerequisite remained the same: the calculated exploitation of natural resources. You needed to use what was available to establish a foothold.
Precisely. And if you examine the location of the earliest settlements in India, their geography directly reflects this reliance. They were established almost always near lakes or rivers and usually situated in hilly, plateau, or wooded areas.
Why that combination? Why not immediately rush for the big fertile plains?
Because the initial survival tools were dictated by these specific surroundings. Hilly, wooded, or plateau areas provided readily accessible resources: stone for tools, bone and antler for early implements, and timber for fire and shelter.
The starter kit.
The starter kit for civilization, exactly. This facilitated the creation of the necessary stone and bone tools for livelihood, not just for hunting, but for the earliest stages of tilling the soil, growing specific localized plants and cereals, and preparing sites for dwelling construction. Before you could tackle the difficult plains, you needed a resource base, and the hills and forests offered that resource base immediately.
This brings us to a truly monumental shift in ancient Indian history and ecology. The technological conquest required to settle the Gangetic Plains.
Oh, yes.
This region is now the agricultural heartland, but initially it posed an absolutely gigantic twofold obstacle to human advance.
The Gangetic challenge was immense. I mean, first you had an impenetrable ecological barrier, incredibly dense forest cover. We're talking thick, old-growth forests.
Not just a few trees.
Oh, no. This required massive, sustained, generations-long efforts of deforestation. But even if you cleared the trees, the second obstacle was the soil itself, the hard alluvial soil, which was notoriously difficult to break and cultivate using the earlier copper or stone tools available to them.
So we're talking about an ecosystem that actively resisted human settlement. It wasn't welcoming.
Not at all. And the sources are clear. The technological key, the solution that allowed for large-scale stationary settlements, didn't arrive until much later. Effective cultivation only became possible from about 500 BC onward.
And what made that date so significant?
The widespread use of two specific innovations,
Yeah.
the iron axe and, more critically, the iron plowshare.
This technological leap was the equivalent of a civilizational restart button.
It absolutely was. The heavy, sharp iron axe could finally tackle the dense, massive tree cover in a way that bronze or copper just couldn't. And the iron plowshare provided the necessary weight, sharpness, and durability to break through that hard alluvial soil.
Whereas the other tools would just...
They would simply snap or dull instantly against it. But this wasn't just an invention. You have to see it as a massive systemic change.
And that's where the ecological and logistical ripple effect becomes clear. The advance required more than just knowing how to forge iron. It demanded an industrial base, right?
The full-on industrial base. This required the discovery of viable iron mines, which in turn mandated the development of the necessary technology for extraction, for smelting, and for large-scale manufacturing across various parts of the country.
All to equip the hundreds of thousands of farmers moving into the plains.
Exactly. This shift from regional subsistence to continental resource exploitation fundamentally changed the environment.
And the necessity of iron underscores the diverse geographical challenges these early farmers faced. It wasn't just the mid-Gangetic plains that required this heavy-duty technology.
No, the sources specify several types of hard soil that necessitated the iron plowshare. There's the hard alluvial soil of the mid-Gangetic plains, as we said. Then there's the tough, often shallow red soil prevalent in the Vinthian zone.
And what about in the south and west?
There you have the expansive, crack-prone black cotton soil found across the Deccan and western India. Without iron, large-scale, stable agriculture in any of these crucial regions was practically impossible.
What's truly remarkable to me, though, is the delayed nature of the full ecological shift. Despite this continuous, intensive deforestation effort starting around 500 BC, the sources point out that the Doab forests, the fertile land between the Ganges and Yamuna rivers, persisted, and wild animals were still being hunted there until the 16th to 17th centuries.
It's an incredible thought.
Centuries of clearing, yet the forest held its ground.
It really gives you a sense of both the immense original scale of the forest cover and, well, the limitations of ancient technology and population density.
Right.
The full ecological shift, where the natural landscape was truly subdued and replaced by modern agricultural fields, only reached completion in modern times. This ongoing, centuries-long struggle is the hard truth of human advance. It was achieved at the constant, direct cost of plants and animals.
But once that conquest began, once humans had iron and started effectively growing plants and rearing animals, they became the ultimate ecological engineers.
They did. They didn't just survive. They successfully multiplied both plant and animal resources to suit their burgeoning needs.
And this multiplication reinforced the environmental determinants of where people settled and how large those settlements could become.
You see a clear, self-reinforcing feedback loop. Favorable zones attracted settlers, and the resources produced by those settlers allowed the population to grow, which in turn attracted even more people, leading to larger, more complex societies.
So what defined these favorable zones? What were they looking for?
They were pretty consistent across regions. Sufficient and reliable rainfall, first and foremost, then close proximity to rivers and lakes, accessible forests for timber and fuel, hills that provided essential minerals for tools, and of course, the most fertile soils.
And conversely, the environmental constraint was equally powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Arid, desert areas that lacked reliable water simply discouraged settlement entirely and often remained unpopulated for centuries, Water was the master variable.
The Gangetic Plains, then, once that initial environmental resistance was overcome by the Iron Revolution, became the preeminent environmental zone of attraction.
The prime real estate.
Yes. Post 500 BC, we see a boom, numerous large settlements established, with many towns emerging in the Doab and the mid-Gangetic Plains. The environment, once controlled, became the engine for urbanization.
And a critical, often understated, component of this ecological success was the river systems themselves. Rivers acted as the essential lifelines of the entire civilization.
Not just for water.
Not just for water. Beyond irrigation, they served as crucial transport routes, easily comparable to modern roads and railways. They allowed for the movement of heavy goods, grain, timber, stones, at a scale and speed that simply wasn't possible over primitive land routes.
And rivers weren't just transport. They were active, sometimes violent, ecological managers of the landscape.
A very good way to put it. When rivers flooded, they had a necessary dual ecological impact. On one hand, they would wash away forested banks, actively preventing the aggressive forest from regrowing into the cleared fields.
So they helped maintain the farmland.
They did. And on the other hand, they irrigated the newly available land and deposited fresh, nutrient-rich silt, which was absolutely essential for long-term agricultural fertility. The floods were both a threat and a gift.
This brings us to a key aha moment, demonstrating the immense, often catastrophic, power of natural forces overriding human efforts.
And the instability of water.
Right. And the decline of the Harappan civilization, this wasn't military defeat, it was a geological disaster.
It really was. And we need to talk about the Sarasvati phenomenon around 2500 BC. The Sarasvati, which is coterminous with the Ghaggar-Hakara river system, was massive. It wasn't a small stream.
But it wasn't alone.
No, it was initially joined by the mighty Yamuna and the Sutlej. This huge confluence provided the immense water resources and the rich alluvial deposits that contributed significantly to the prosperity and vast territorial growth of the Harappan culture. The civilization was built on the foundation of that water flow.
But geological change is slow, relentless, and completely indifferent to human progress.
Around 1700 BC, a profound change occurred. The Sutlej and possibly the Yamuna shifted eastward.
Why? What caused it?
Well, whether this was due to tectonic activity, gradual geological uplift, or a series of seismic events, the effect was devastating. The main water supply feeding the Sarasvati system was essentially starved.
And the consequence wasn't just dryness, it was ecological collapse.
Total collapse. This geological change directly and profoundly affected the post-urban Harappan settlements. The loss of the river meant the immediate loss of irrigation, the loss of those crucial trade routes, and the complete halt of the annual deposit of new fertile silt.
So it forced a massive demographic and cultural retreat.
Yes. A retreat toward the more stable Gangetic and peninsular river systems. It's a powerful lesson in ecological fragility. The shift of one or two rivers over a relatively short period can bring down an entire sophisticated civilization, forcing humans to fundamentally alter their settlement patterns.
Okay, let's shift our focus to how strategic water resources enabled the rise of major urban hubs, illustrating the sheer importance of river junctions in ancient geography.
Pataliputra. It's the perfect example. The first great city and major state capital of India, and its initial strategic genius was its location at the junction of the Ganges and the Sun rivers.
And the confluence didn't end there, which reinforced its status as an environmental magnet.
That's right. Nearby, the Gandak and the Gaggara joined the Ganges from the north, and the Punpun joined it from the south.
So this configuration, with the city essentially protected and served by rivers on three sides, made Pataliputra what? A massive water port.
A massive water port. It was the hub for both defense and commerce, which was absolutely crucial for its unprecedented rise to prominence.
And even though the Sun River later shifted significantly westward,
the power of that initial junction dictated the foundation of centralized political authority. That location was everything. And we see similar patterns in even earlier prehistoric times. Churand in northern Bihar was important precisely because it was located at the junction of the Ganges and the Gargara.
And the excavations at Churand tell a story linking the river junction to forest clearance and the earliest forms of permanent habitation.
They do. The discovery of Neolithic tools made of antler bones suggests that deer were hunted extensively in the nearby forested area.
So the junction served as a critical base camp.
A base camp, exactly.
Yeah.
It concentrated resources, making it easier to both exploit the surrounding forest and access the river's resources.
And this reliance on water also shows human adaptability. while major rivers were preferred for trade and stability.
People adapted. Even in the second millennium BC, particularly in eastern UP and northern Bihar, people weren't entirely reliant on the massive river systems. They utilized lakes and tanks when major rivers were unavailable.
A crucial practice of local water management.
A practice that continues in many rural areas to this day. It's an ancient strategy.
Our journey now takes us to the most unpredictable, yet absolutely essential environmental force of the subcontinent, the rhythm of rainfall,
The monsoon.
the monsoon, and how its extremes dictated the fate, the size, and even the daily pace of ancient life.
We can circle back again to the Harappan culture to drive this point home. While we know the Harappan zone today as arid and semi-desert, its initial spectacular success in the 3rd millennium BC is directly attributed by scientists to a period where the monsoon was stronger.
So it provided adequate and reliable rainfall.
Exactly. The civilization is literally built on a temporary, favorable climate regime.
But history shows that favorable conditions rarely last forever.
They don't.
Yeah.
And once the rainfall reverted to its usual level, meaning once the climate dried out and the monsoon weakened, the ecological support structure collapsed, severely impacting those settlements that had grown large on that temporary water abundance.
And we see this devastating pattern repeated later at the local level across the subcontinent.
Yes, consider the specific poignant example of Inamgaon in Maharashtra around 1000 BC. Archaeological analysis of the plant and animal remains found there suggests the onset of an extremely arid phase, a prolonged drought.
What was the human consequence of that level of sustained ecological pressure in a localized farming community? I mean, they couldn't rely on the monsoon. They couldn't rely on their fixed fields.
The environmental imperative forced an immediate and complete change in lifestyle. The settled farmers were forced to desert their homes, their fields now useless, and revert to a more flexible, water-seeking existence.
Pastoral nomadism.
Pastoral nomadism. They couldn't sustain complex, settled agriculture, so the environment forced a regression, determining their occupation, their social structure, and their immediate migration patterns.
So while rainfall was absolutely necessary for agriculture and settlements, the heavy tropical monsoon rains could also be a catastrophic disruptor.
Oh, a huge disruptor. It could halt regular human work, transport, and even social life for months at a time.
This is a powerful point that demonstrates how environment influences culture and even religion.
Mhm. We have a compelling example in Gautama Buddha, who codified this environmental halt into religious practice. He suspended his mission of teaching Buddhism annually for 4 months, the height of the rainy season.
So he would stay confined to fixed locations like Rajagriha, Vaishali, and Shravasti for what was known as Varshavasa, the rain retreat.
The rain retreat. He is said to have spent 26 rainy seasons just in Shravasti alone. And this was not merely spiritual discipline, it was logistical necessity.
So,
While the roads became impassable rivers, travel was incredibly dangerous due to flooding and potential illness, and the mission simply couldn't proceed effectively in that environment.
and that necessity, the environmental halt, still echoes today.
It does. The cultural tradition of not performing marriages in the rainy season is a direct legacy of this ancient rhythm when human activity was forced to slow down. It's an inherited acknowledgement of the monsoon's power.
Of course, the sources note that today, with modern infrastructure, unless an institution is specifically closed or workers are granted leave, the vast majority of economic and social activity just struggles on despite the heavy showers.
Right. We have finally managed to partially insulate ourselves from this specific natural rhythm.
And beyond the heavy rain and resulting floods, the source material also details other catastrophic natural hazards that ancient societies had to contend with.
Yes, things like hurricanes, prolonged droughts, and earthquakes. Nature had many diverse ways to check human advance.
We encounter references to major famines, such as the pre-Mauryan famine around 300 BC, which was so severe it led to the migration of some Jainas from Magad all the way to South India.
And you have to think about the economic collapse and the scale of resource devastation required to force a major demographic shift across half a continent. It must have been apocalyptic.
But what stands out here is a crucial caveat that speaks to the nature of ancient record-keeping. While we know these famines and calamities happened, researchers are still actively working to discover the specific documents detailing the natural hazards,
The precise triggers.
the precise floods, droughts, or seismic events that caused them. We know the massive political and demographic outcome, but the exact environmental trigger often remains frustratingly elusive in the ancient record, swallowed by the passage of time.
It's a historian's great frustration.
This inherent reliance, vulnerability, and eventual strategic conquest of nature leads us directly into our final section, ancient attitudes.
Okay.
How did a society so intimately connected with its fluctuating environment incorporate these powerful forces, these constraints and opportunities, into its cultural and religious life?
They moved beyond mere adaptation. They deified them. The forces of nature, particularly water, were regarded as divine entities. This was a form of profound respect for the life-giving source.
In the earliest texts, the reverence is clear.
Very clear. The Rig Veda, for example, depicts the Sarasvati specifically as a goddess. And as the ecological importance shifted east toward the great agricultural heartland, in post-Vedic times, the Ganga emerged as the primary mother goddess.
A central spiritual tradition that persists across India to this day.
It does. And because earth and water were the essential, twin forces that sustained all plants and animals, the very foundation of the human food system, they too came to be considered mother figures. This reflects a deep cultural understanding that life derived its sustenance from these fundamental elements.
But here is a critical distinction that provides a fascinating tension in the sources.
Mm-hmm.
While the rivers and the earth were deeply revered, they were gods and mothers, there is nothing to show that explicit institutional plans or policies were devised to protect either of them in ancient times.
Right. Deification was a spiritual practice, but it didn't immediately translate into what we would call conservation legislation.
That gap between reverence and policy brings us to flora, where preservation often had a clear practical motivation. Many trees and plants were considered sacred, but their holiness frequently stemmed from their utility.
Creating a functional reason for their preservation.
Exactly. We're talking about specific, widely revered flora like neem, pipal, vat, shami, and tulsi, as well as common herbs and even grass.
Right.
They were worshipped, but the source makes the rationale exceptionally clear. They were valued primarily because of their immense medicinal properties. By assigning sacred value, society ensured its vital pharmacy was preserved and not destroyed for simple firewood or clearance.
That makes perfect sense. The desire to protect both large and small trees is explicitly expressed in various ancient texts, reflecting this understanding of their inherent practical value, not just their religious status. It was a form of utility-based conservation.
A form that thankfully continues to influence environmental protection sentiments today. And even in ritual, we see a wish for ecological stability. At the conclusion of large sacrifices or even ordinary rituals, priests and worshippers traditionally wish peace and prosperity, or shanti.
Not just for the human community.
But for forest trees and plants in general, it's an active acknowledgement that the well-being of the human community is inextricably linked to the peace and non-disturbance of the natural world.
Now let's turn to fauna and the foundational development of the ethic of non-slaughter. Many ancient texts contain strong condemnations of the killing of animals, reflecting a growing awareness of their value beyond just immediate consumption.
And Gautama Buddha was central to this shift, particularly concerning cows.
He was. According to the sources, he was the first major figure to stress the explicit need to protect cows, detailed in the Pali canonical text, the Suttanipata.
What's most fascinating is that Buddha's initial argument wasn't spiritual.
No, it was intensely practical and entirely ecological and economic. He stressed the virtue of rearing cows because they were vital components of the settled agricultural life. They help grow plants by providing traction for the plowing of those hard soils we discussed earlier.
Right, the iron plowshare still needed a power source.
And they provide people with essential food through dairy, vitality, health, and happiness. His injunction against killing them was rooted in their life-sustaining, undeniable utility to the agrarian economy.
It was a pragmatic conservation mandate, protect the cow, because it fuels the civilization. But over time, the motivation deepened.
It did. In the early Christian centuries, Brahmanical texts lent a powerful religious layer to this pragmatic Buddhist teaching.
How so?
They began speaking of dire consequences in the next world powerful religious sanctions for those who killed cows. This layered approach was highly effective. A practical conservation mandate, keep the cow for farming, was cemented by a powerful religious threat, kill the cow, lose salvation.
And that secured cow protection deeply into the cultural psyche.
Very deeply. And this cultural protection wasn't limited just to cows, highlighting an expansion of the protected animal sphere. Later on, even the elephant came to be highly revered and worshipped.
And why the elephant?
Well, likely due to its immense utility in warfare, in transport, and its status as a symbol of royal power and, well, ecological dominance. It was a living tank.
So what does this centuries-long process mean when we zoom out to synthesize this deep dive?
I think the fundamental key lesson is that human advance in ancient India was inherently defined as a massive struggle against nature.
Right. Principally directed against the existing population of wild plants and animals through relentless deforestation and hunting.
It was an extractive and pioneering process necessary for settlement. But once those crucial resources, plants and animals, were brought under control, once domestication and agriculture were established via tools like the iron plowshare, human efforts shifted entirely.
They moved from conquest to multiplication.
Exactly. They moved from mere conquest to strategic multiplication, focusing all energy on increasing the output of both domesticated flora and fauna for human benefit. The struggle gave way to strategic stewardship, though still fundamentally centered on human needs.
So here is the overarching perspective, and it really is the essential takeaway for any listener seeking to understand ancient society. History, conventionally, deals primarily with the interaction between humans, their movements, and their evolving institutions across time and place.
But history, especially ancient history, cannot be correctly constructed. It cannot be truly understood unless historians, and listeners like you, constantly bear in mind the ongoing, relentless, and often overwhelming interaction between human efforts on the one hand and the functioning of natural forces on the other.
That ecological perspective is non-negotiable for true historical insight.
Absolutely. The shifting river is just as much a political actor as the king who built his capital on its banks.
It really is. The necessity of iron for tilling, the timing of the monsoon, the geological shift of the Sarasvati, these are the hidden, powerful, and often overlooked characters that dictated the entire shape of ancient society.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to consider, connecting the ancient ecology to the modern world.
Okay.
Take a moment to examine the current economic, political, and demographic geography of modern India. How much of the location of major industrial cities, the trajectory of modern highways, the density of population, or even the persistent regional cultural divides are still fundamentally shaped by those same immutable natural forces, like the original density of the Gangetic alluvial soil, the ancient patterns of reliable rainfall, or the historical courses of those life-giving yet shifting rivers that ancient societies had to contend with millennia ago.
The echo of the ancient landscape.
The ecological past is still the powerful governor of the geographical present.
A truly profound note to end on. Thank you for diving deep with us into the ecological foundations of ancient India. We'll catch you next time.